Like, I watched the live stream as well, and then I let the audio open, and then bad things tend to happen.
About 15 seconds later, yeah.
Yes, exactly. So,
I have it sorted over here.
All right, then tell me the number.
Are we ready for transformation status, Inam, from CoreFx Lab?
No, we should do the UTF-8 parsing formatting and base 64.
We have the span in the second hour, so we can leave it for there.
Okay.
Yeah. So if the transformation status is not ready, why? Oh, it's marked blocked. Okay. Fuck. Okay. Second one.
Can someone share the screen?
Oh yeah, I could, but you could also just watch the YouTube.
And you can ask comments on the YouTube as well.
Yeah.
I don't see you online on YouTube. I don't see you streaming.
I'm streaming, but the problem is that
it's in public.
And I can see it right now, so it's clearly happening.
Okay.
So the PM version of works on my box.
Exactly. Streams on my box. All right. What's the number?
That's the int PTR versus u int PTR. That's so 2020256.
So I thought that Ari is here because of the UTF-8 parsing and formatting. Should he come back in an hour, or we should do it now? Or Ari, maybe you want to just...
I'm mostly observing. So
you don't mind sitting here for 2 hours?
I don't know. Well,
okay.
It'll never be precisely 11, so I mean...
That's true too.
Yeah.
Is the UTF parsing kind of related to span, or in the second hour, or not?
Well,
it's part of that family, I guess.
UTF-8.
So we have this issue open for 3 weeks. We can postpone this, or ready for review.
Int pointer. Oh, I see. This is related to the whole discussion about native ints. Yeah. Ooh.
Okay. You're allergic to what you're observing here?
Yep, I'm allergic to native ints.
I mean, we can. I mean, like, the only reason we should probably bring in Awesome, because I think he can only come to the 11. So
okay,
bring him earlier, then we can.
Oh, okay, that's fine. I just didn't know.
All right. So then, should we just go with this one then before we?
I don't have strong opinions.
Okay. Because it's already on the screen.
I still.
What do you mean?
Show it to me.
Here. I am.
Ah, okay. Fair. Okay.
I know why.
You can tweet it. It's okay.
I did. It's just unlisted.
Oh.
So you have to have the link. That's fine.
So these are... Everything on the screen here is new API being proposed. I guess everything on the screen down.
So what did we learn? We basically said that we will probably expose new types by the compiler. They will not map to InPTR and UNPTR. There will be net new types, right?
It's still not closed whether they will map to this type or not.
Okay.
We haven't made that decision, but there are compatibility problems if we would want to map the new language features to this type. But regardless whether the language feature will be mapped to this new type or not, it would be, I think, good to expand what int pointer has in terms of API surface, because right now it's kind of, it's strange type. It has some operations, it doesn't have others. There's some. There were people who wanted to keep InPointer, uInPointer to be super simple, and then there were people who wanted to have more and more operations, and we kind of ended up over years in the middle. And I think the battle of having InPointer being super simple is already lost. So I think it just makes sense to fill in the APIs that people want to use.
Is the intent behind this to make this a proper arithmetic type where you can do addition, subtraction, shifting, so on?
So this is the native int discussion that we have. Yeah. If we decide to map the language features to this type, then yes.
But it sounds like that's
there are so many issues. For example, like language native int types, you would like them to honor checked, unchecked blocks in the language. We cannot do it for InPointer because it would be a breaking change, for example. There are some ideas how we can, I call it hack it, such that it kind of works, but they are all kind of ugly solutions. So, as I said, to summarize, it's not yet clear whether the language features will map to this type or not, but I think it just makes sense to add APIs. Like, people have been asking for these APIs for
But when we get native in, would we add these APIs? If we're pretty much going to deprecate them or pretty much
No, I don't think.
These operations will just be using native ints.
So many people said that if we don't map the language features to these types, they will keep using these types anyway, because they have too much code invested and using InPointers, uInPointers. So they said even if you don't provide the language mapping to these types, we still want additional APIs because we need them, and we're not gonna move away from InPointer.
So what was the compatible issue again? I think that was the idea that it was like the checked, unchecked problem, right?
It was checked, unchecked, and it was a behavior of toString.
Oh, the toString, yes.
I forgot. There was maybe one more.
Yeah, I think these two. Wasn't it?
I mean, if we're not.
Oh, in boxing, there were like differences that that you could detect if you used reflection or boxing.
Yeah. So if it's not being used as a full numeric type, then I think that the bool equals event pitter is the only thing we should add.
Which one?
The Boolean equals event pitter, and I guess int compared to event pitter.
Operator for the
Well, Imo, can you show existing APIs on InPointer?
Yeah, we wouldn't say it again.
Because maybe it will change your mind. It's already kind of a bit.
I don't think there's a ton.
It's not a pure.
Yeah, but like parsing doesn't make sense.
So I actually have had a need to do that in the past, but I did work around it without too much issue. So
By work around it, you mean you use ints?
I used long because I might be running on a 64 and then I just chastitude.
Yeah, that's my objection to all the int-based things. Is we expect most of our people these days to be working on a 64-bit system, so all the int stuff is just setting you up for failure.
Well, why? It's just comparing to an int.
Why wouldn't you have long too then?
Yeah.
Then maybe if the comment is the API should be expanded, then sure.
Yeah, you should probably have neither or both.
That seems fair. So, like, as far as existing APIs go, are they all net new? Yeah, it seems like they're all net new, right?
Mm-hmm. Interesting. We have in pointer to 0, right? Min value, I guess, is not necessarily the same.
Maybe it's in pointer assign.
Yeah.
Yeah, so we already have subtract that takes an int, which is interesting. We already started on the path of having arithmetic operations on this type.
Yeah, but usually you're not like long jumping your memory more than 4 gig away from. I have this thing here. I know that I want to read a thing that's 8 gig that way.
So one thing I would be interested, who filed this proposal?
Tanner.
Like, why this subset of APIs and not some others? So that's an interesting question. Because it still feels like a subset of something that people would want to do with.
Well, I think what he has done is he's basically looked at int and added the APIs that int has to this type. Like int doesn't have operators for plus, minus, and pretty much none of the other ones because they're all built in.
Well, yeah, it has them, but like they are built in.
Yes. So the type really doesn't declare operators. Like it's just built into the.
But the reason for it is that if you have methods, then the language has to call them and cannot provide the unchecked semantics.
Yes. Well, there's that. It's also just overhead. Like you don't want to call operators. Right? They're basically IL instructions, right? So I think the question is, like, what do we do with these guys, right? I mean, if we were to add operators, then if the language starts to actually map to these types, then we corner ourselves again into a weird position where now the compiler has to decide, do I call the operators or do I treat them as intrinsics, right? And I think we don't want to do that. Which kind of begs the question whether we should even provide equality to begin with.
I feel like this is a little premature. Once we settle on the native int thing, we can come back and visit how we want to apply it.
Yeah, and I
say, like, regardless of whether we protect them or not. I mean, like, these methods here, like comparisons and parsing, are unrelated to that.
Right. I think that the I comparable event pointer is reasonable. It's like less than exists. So at least I think less than exists.
And in addition, I would say we should have language people in the room when we make this decision on this API. Like, Jared has been involved in some of the discussions about native ints. He should be here.
And you had said that it was still an open issue as to whether native int would be exposed as this type.
Yes. And if we add more APIs to them, that might make that harder. Or
Yep.
Yeah, I think though, like, I think one of the concerns was the already defined addition and quality operators as well. So like the problem with these three guys.
Yeah, I think tabling this until native int is resolved is.
So who's driving the native int discussion?
Mads told me he will schedule a meeting very soon.
Okay.
I forgot it. It can be like within 2 weeks or something like this. He gave me a date, I forgot what it was.
What was the other one? Native int and native human, right?
Yep.
Right. Next number.
24, 42, 6.
47. Stuff. No description provided. Good job.
No, there's a description. It's
Have you seen our template?
It's in the title. What else do you need?
Already a pointer class in the framework? There is.
And you see somebody commented with a thumb up.
EM Carbon.
I have carbon
Browser open hovers at the same
People
time.
like it. People like it.
One person.
People.
No. Me and the other person.
So memory handler is the thingy that you return when you do what again?
Well, so when you basically retain memory of T, you get a handle and you can get a pointer out of the handle if the memory was pinned.
So which namespace are you guys in again?
It's in system buffers.
That's why the proposal is useful there, by the way.
Maybe it's still in CoreFx. Is there in CoreFx Labs?
It's in CoreFx.
The code's in CoreCLR.
And what are you going to see?
MemoryHandle.
You have a bug in your tool.
I think that maybe the next issue.
That would be a bug in your tool.
So my point is that I think the data is like the search will work. I'm just thinking the data. It's a bug in the general vicinity, but not in the tool itself. So I think we talked about pinpointer last time, didn't we? And I said we want to not call it pinpointer because
there are not really other point. Like it's either a native memory or it's pinned pointer. It cannot be unpinned pointer. There are no unpinned pointers.
Sure there are.
What's the return type of this property?
You write unsafe, the address of something. You now have a pointer to it. You didn't pin it, so the garbage collector, garbage collector memory mapper are free to move it.
To me, pinned itself was a misnomer because you could easily create, for example, an owned memory around native memory. There's no pinning that happens anywhere. Memory's not moving because the memory doesn't move. So it's not a pinned pointer in that case. It's just a pointer.
I think you're using pinned as a synonym for immovable. So, it's redundant.
Yeah,
Well, if we rename the property, we should probably rename the constructor parameter, unless this is a shipped type. But EMOSTool suggests it isn't.
I hope not.
It isn't. Yes.
EMOSTool suggests the type doesn't even exist, whatever you want to do.
Right, that's why it suggests that it's not part of that.
This returns white star, right? Like that was
Do we have any other places that return the pointer? NPTR looks like it has a 2-pointer which returns a void star, which is a method.
We have plenty of white star guys in the parameter.
No, I'm just trying to look at other precedents if we have anything else called pointer in context.
Well, I would say whatever we are calling it, we call it pointer. I mean, I don't know what else you would call a pointer. Unsafe reference.
That's not what I'm.
We have S-pointer on system type. 2-pointer on int.ptr.
Alright.
System reflection pointer.
Next one.
Yeah, so, like I said, if we're renaming the property, we should probably rename the constructor parameter, because it's also called pin pointer.
Did you find the type? Your tool is better than yours.
Well, yeah, I found the source code for it.
Nice. Where is it?
CoreCLR. Because I wrote the word memory handle in Google, and it was like, oh, here's the source code. It was faster than EMOSTool.
Google has better indexing than EMOSTool?
Yeah.
Wow.
We've got a feedback there. 24, 44, 2.
Go louder. 24,
44, 2. No. 24, 44, and then 2.
Typing skills are.
Stephen,
you're up if you're still with us.
Yeah, so we added, we already agreed to add 2 new methods to socket, or extension methods on socket for reading and writing, read async, write async with memory. And we added them to the socket task extensions class because that's where the existing task-based methods for socket are. I think, when this was originally added, we'd assumed we'd be adding this stuff out of band and yada yada, but we've progressed since then. That's not really happening. And so it makes sense to, it logically makes sense to just add them as instance methods directly to socket. The problem with that is we end up having conflicts with the existing extensions because the compiler, once it finds instance methods of a given name, it doesn't consider extension methods. So by adding the new signatures, which aren't compatible with the old signatures, if someone was passing an array segment and socket flags, whatever, the compiler will say, oh, I can't use that with this new overload, and it'll fail to compile. Which means we have two options. Either we add them to socket task extensions as we originally decided, or we add them to the socket class as instance methods, and we add instance-based methods of the existing extension methods to the socket class as well.
So how many existing, extension methods do we have?
There's two of relevance. There are a bunch of extension methods that we could, if you look at socket task extensions, there's like 10 of them or something. But the only ones that are relevant for this in particular are
receive async,
send async and receive async ones.
Oh, actually, this and the send async, right?
Say again.
And the send async as well.
Yeah, send async and receive async.
Yeah, so 4 of them. Okay. Or actually, not receive. Oh.
Is receive from async not relevant?
No, just because we haven't decided to add memory-based overloads for that. We could, we just haven't yet. And the same for send to async. So there's a question. We could just define the new methods as they're currently checked in. They're on socket task extensions. We could just leave it like that, or we could choose to move those to socket as instance methods, and also add the ones that could be result in conflicts to socket as instance methods, at which point the socket task extension methods are basically obsolete. Or we could choose to move everything from socket task extensions, create instance methods for all of them, at which point the entire socket task extensions class is obsolete.
So what is the conflict that you're gonna get to? Like if we just move the 2 new methods into instance methods.
So the new methods are like, for example, let's say it's a receive async overload that takes a memory of byte and a socket flex. Once you add that as an instance method, you then have socket.receiveAsync that takes a memory byte and socket task extensions receive async that takes an array segment. If you have an existing call that takes the array segment, the compiler stops considering the extension method once there's an instance method of the same name.
Oh, so it doesn't look for overloads on extension methods at all?
Right.
Once there's an instance method, it doesn't consider extensions.
I didn't know that.
If an instance method is found, then that is
by name, I check.
Is all that's considered, and if no instance method is found, then all extension methods are resolved in a very complicated manner that Jared could explain, and I didn't expect to.
Okay.
So Steve, is the issue because there is a conversion from array segment to memory?
Actually, I misspoke. It's not the array segment ones. It's the iList ones.
Oh, okay.
And there is no conversion from iList to, memory. So if you have existing calls that use the iList ones, because it won't consider any of the extension methods, you get an error saying can't convert iList to memory.
So it'd be a compile breaking change for those people. They could switch it to a static call, but.
Actually, I don't think that's.
We have buffer there, by the way, not memory. Does it make a difference?
Buffer was renamed to memory.
Oh, I see.
So Stephen, I just tried what you said. I don't think what you said is true. The compiler will resolve overloads between instance method and extension method.
Okay.
Called your foo.2
Yep. Which you can see because of the monitor, but it is.
I don't think that's not the same situation.
Because
Why?
This may be the in-assembly, out-of-assembly problem.
No, they don't care about which assembly the stuff is in, so long as it's an extension method. It's an extension method, no matter where it's coming from. It doesn't change mining rules.
Yeah, but you've specialized X. That's not the case here.
What do you mean I specialized X?
You're calling a method on an extension method on int.
Yes.
That's the case here is an instance method on int versus an extension method on int?
Well, the toString is instance method on
So
on
toString
int,
exists
right?
on int, right? And I added an overload for toString by an extension method, and the compiler calls that one instead. Isn't that the same scenario?
Wait, just create new type X, whatever.
Unless int is special.
No, I don't think they do that. I mean, we can try, but I'm pretty sure the compiler resolves overloads between extension and instance method. The only problem is you have certainly issues where, when you only consider instance method, it finds a unique match. But if you consider overloads from extension methods and you would no longer find a unique one, then they discard it as well, I believe. So they only consider it when they physically cannot resolve it. So in other words, let's say I have an overload that takes an int on the instance, and then you also add extension methods, and then you say I add one that takes a long. Let's say the instance one has a long. I add an extension method that takes an int and I pass in an int. Right, so the extension method will be the better fit, but they don't consider the extension methods because the instance one already applies. I think that's the rule. I think they only consider overloads on the extension type if they cannot find a match on the instance method at all. But it's not just by name; it's given the types. So basically,
something else is going on in this case because simply by adding it, it fails to compile with that error that I was talking about.
So what's the error you're getting?
What'd you say?
What was the error that you were getting?
Cannot convert iList to memory.
Yeah, I think it may be the same example because I think you probably type is convertible or something.
So if you have an extension method that's like toString that's agriculture and more specific, that's an extension method.
Do we have someone like Ben helping us out?
I prefer the one that is on the base, for sure. Because it takes that format provider that can convert culture into a format provider. Anyway, okay, so then if we take this as a given that you can't do it on the extension types. I mean, I personally was never a fan of the socket task extensions to begin with because it always felt like a giant hack. They really should have been on the instant, but we just couldn't put it there. It seems like a good point in time to do that change then. Is there any concern with doing it on the instance, Steve? Is it just because we now have duplication?
Duplication, and we've created this weird socket task extensions thing. Sorry, I'm distracted. I'm trying to create a repro before we're done discussion.
Well, then prove me wrong now. I can understand that.
Of course you're wrong.
I'm pretty sure I am. It's just a question of how. So, I mean, I'm not too concerned if we actually have the same signatures on the other type, because in that case we can just literally hide this type, and no existing code is affected by this. I mean, that seems like a very clean change.
So why would we not just keep all of these methods as extension methods? I understand if we wanted...
We have to keep them anyway for compatibility, right? We cannot just remove them.
No. What I'm saying is, this issue presumes that we want to move some methods to be instance methods.
Right.
Because we introduced them recently.
Why don't
Well,
we just
the issue is asking. The first option here is leave everything as extensions.
Yeah, why would we not do that? What is...
One of the reasons why we had it earlier, because I mean, generally speaking, when you have stuff like this, you really wanted to have it on the type usually, because sometimes you want to exploit things in your implementation that you can't cleanly do from an extension type, or you want to make things virtual if you want to make the type inheritable at some point, right?
Like socket is not a sealed class.
But those are hypothetical. Do we want to do any of these? Like, what is driving...
No, I think when we're talking about socket task, I mean, I may be wrong, but I believe, given that David already voted yes on that, I'm pretty sure Schulman brought up the issue that there are certain things they couldn't do in the extension methods for that particular reason. So they had to do something differently than what it would have.
So it would be good to know what it is, because I have to say, like, a change that basically duplicates the methods is not... I mean, there's some, there's cost to it. So we shouldn't do it without knowing why.
We basically said we will ship them as extension, we'll eventually make them instance method. That was already part of the design maybe ship this the first time. The question is just when, rather than if. But so in principle, I agree. Like if there's, I mean, it just seems wrong to add more extension methods now. Like if you already like said, you know, maybe we should make them instant, because then you just make the dep even bigger, right?
Still doesn't change the fact. Maybe we said that we will move them to be instance methods. What is the reason for it? Don't get me wrong, I like instance methods more, but given where we are, it would be good to have some non-trivial reason to do it. And also, if we duplicated them, how does it look in IntelliSense when you have instance and extension methods with the same
Extension methods.
extension methods are completely not visible? So okay, so that's not too bad.
There's
I'm not sure what that.
There's a tab. That's not going to list both of them. How would that wouldn't make any sense, right?
I believe it does actually.
There's a separate tab for it that tells us to get extension methods like filter. Then you might get the extension methods, but otherwise. You have it right
very
here.
quickly see that actually. So let's say. Oh. Something I think Sky was hooking up to my. This is the one that is on the time. Here's my extension. That being said, all we have to do is put editor browser never on these things, and then they don't show up.
It shows it, but you can never call it. That's weird.
You can call it via static if you
Yeah, if you hit enter now, I guess you're already in auto completion. What was auto completion going to change it to a static call?
Yeah, Wes is right. The method shows in IntelliSense, and the moment you try to call it, it won't be called.
Well, that's true, although I would argue that's the same thing as anything else. I mean, it will effectively just bind to the other one. Right? When I hover over that, it will call this guy.
Yeah, but having said that, I think what you said is right. We could apply editor browsable false, which will kind of solve the problem.
I would apply to both the type and the method, and they don't show up in IntelliSense in the extension syntax, and like the other one was, you don't see the type and you don't see the methods, and that's good enough. I would assert.
All right. If we do this, then I
Are we
think
hiding
it's fine.
all the extensions though? There's a lot of extensions on that extension class. We're going to
Okay.
be instance.
So the C# language 5.0 specification says emos code should not have compiled.
But it compiles over here as well.
The language spec says it doesn't.
Well, the specs are usually hard to read, like forward like this upload number 5 that says unless. Anyway, so the
Overload is a common scenario.
Oh, there are many times that CSC deviates from the spec. Usually when the spec says it should fail, and CSC is like, I can make that.
I suspect I've done it not hundreds. I suspect I've done it a lot myself. I can't believe I sound loud.
So anyway, so I think if we were to move extension methods, I would only hide the ones which we actually duplicate. The ones that we still leave in, we would leave in. And then if there's at least one extension method that we leave on, I wouldn't hide the type.
That's right. That was what I was getting
So
at.
that's basically all. Okay. But I would.
I'll also double check to make sure I'm not full of crap.
Yeah.
Check the compiler implementation, not the spec.
I just did actually get the same result as Emo as well, but it works overall.
Yeah, that's my point.
But I also just use an older version of the spec because I haven't repped the spec in some time. Anyway, so I believe you want to wait for David to come back and then either go over option 1 or option 2. I would say if we were to go over option number 2, seems to me we should probably move all the methods. Is there any benefit of leaving some and not moving all? Like I would at that point just call this thing dead and just move everything. Seems very weird to do half of it.
The only thing that might be a little bit against that we, a few months ago we created this guidance of like what we should make instance methods versus extension methods and that stuff. Are we in line with that?
Sorry, what did the guidance say?
I forgot. But we created the guidance.
Really?
Yep.
I don't remember that.
There was like at some point like we said like, oh, we're gonna add new extension methods and not, and on core types we said like, oh, we don't want to just bloat the number of methods on that and that type of stuff. Probably doesn't apply here, but
so I have no idea what I said, but I wish I had said don't do it unless absolutely necessary. Whatever I've said, that's hopefully the guidance. But I remember that discussion because we wanted to make them instant method and we couldn't because we had to make them available out of Anderson. Yes. And so that was basically the compromise. Anyway, it seems like we have. Let me just update this to make sure. Capture this. If we wanted.
And if I was wrong, which I will figure out after the meeting, and we can just add the new ones to socket, do we want to do anything with the existing ones?
I would just leave them.
Stephen, is there any profit in gains if you move those to be instant methods as well?
So this is the question number 1 that Imo asked. Like, what do people see as a benefit of moving them?
Sorry.
Like if there's a perf improvement, or maybe they've heard from customers that there's some confusion about why these methods are extensions, people cannot find them, whatever the reason is, then we should probably move if there's some reason.
Keep in mind we'll have to do the same thing on desktop framework too, if there's any other extra requirements coming from moving them to be instance methods instead.
Yes. Do they even exist on desktop right now? I think we only ship this thing out of that.
No, that extension library got added into the framework.
Look down. Lost the benefit of out of band anyway.
Well, as soon as this became part of the standard, we lost that benefit.
Yes.
So it just takes one platform to ship in, right? So
that is the thing with out of bandness. All it takes is one party to look.
we should probably call it in badness, not out of badness.
Out of badness?
In badness.
Right. Next issue number.
Alright, UnixEpoch 24449.
I'm just curious, this was added 12 days ago. Does that mean we don't have any ready to review older than 12 days ago?
Yep. We coughed up pretty well.
Wow.
Well, again, me static read only field.
Didn't we have some Unix style data
There's
mapping?
supposed to be a method on there, like two of
I think it's called Unix.
But we did have some if you have the Unix in the name. Why don't we just try to start about that?
I think you're better saying.
Nah, that can't be right.
System.DateTimeOffset.to Unix time seconds.
So datetime didn't get it, but datetime offset did.
Because it makes sense because it has to be UTC. And datetime offset's the only way to have an absolute time.
Right. You're saying we have something similar on the DateTime. Jesus Christ. It says from Unix times 7. I see. There's a then they have 2 Unix buildings.
For DateTime offset, you could get this by calling DateTime offset from Unix time 0, but
And then we don't need to have the epoch on DateTime offset because it's represented differently, or should we also add them to DateTime offset if we were to add them to DateTime? Oh, never mind.
yeah.
DateTime offset.
I mean, so we should I think it makes sense on DateTime offset. It probably makes sense on DateTime. It just is a question of how much we feel like evolving DateTime or saying it's dead, use DateTime offset.
I think people still use both,
So I think it's fine to add.
especially if they want to represent UTC.
Yeah.
I think.
So there are comments on the issue where, people are basically reinforcing that, like, do we want to keep promoting daytime as something to do?
And my question will be, how would you use this API on DateTime? Like
Daytime dot.
Well, it would be the
That
DateTime
Unix
value that you
epoch.
have minus DateTime.UnixEpoch.
What?
You just want to know what the time span is. Because you're doing something with... No, wait. Does JavaScript use the Unix epoch, or does it define its own?
There's example on the top, or at the bottom over here. Yep, top.
Well, I mean, their example usage is they just want to Unix time
Which there's already an API for
on DateTime offset.
that. Yeah.
What is it called? To Unix time?
2 Unix time settings.
Okay.
So what does 2 Unix time do? They basically
That-
say back something that's relative to that epoch, essentially.
Yes.
I would just say, like, people on Unix, especially, are used to this concept. We should just have it for the sake of somebody's looking for it and they can find it.
Well, apparently the to Unix time is not discoverable.
It's not that it does different thing. Like,
Well, it's on... We have to file time, which is the Windows value. We have that on DateTime. But the to Unix time is only on DateTime offset. DateTime is terrible because it has the I don't know if I'm local time or UTC time, and then it always assumes whichever thing you don't want it to do. And DateTime offset removes that ambiguity by always knowing what time zone it
well,
represents.
but I also would say that, yeah, you can use to Unix time, but you have to know that you have to first create daytime with, 0 and such a core concept in Unix programming. I think we should just add those.
Yeah, like, I think it's fine to add it.
Or do we need to add the one on the DateTime offset then?
Or,
Or, the consistency with the existing to Unix time. Like, how do we think about that?
Private static read-only, and this is just, why don't we just make it public static read-only?
I don't understand. Why would we not add it to daytime offset?
Because we have the to Unix time over there, already
Or
there.
it's different thing. To
Because
Unix time gives you.
Technically, you can use it that more.
Technically, you could care that you want the difference measured in ticks instead of in seconds, because Unix time is defined in seconds, but you want to be relative to that same time point.
So the interesting thing is, like, this sample code here is actually well served by the 2 Unix time.
Yes, this is exactly
Yes,
the
so I
two
agree
from
with that
Unix
one.
time.
But not with the 2 Unix time is a perfect substitute for Unix epoch. I mean, you can use one to compute the other, but it's like you have to write some code and.
Yeah, I think it's fine to expose.
Yeah, I have to say, like, this whole idea of, like, not giving it on daytime because you want people to push to daytime offset, I'm thinking that's not the right way of doing it.
Yeah,
That's fair. I asked it as a question.
I think the better way to do it is expose the API and then for example, have an analyzer that detects that. Because if you're using DateTime.UnixEpoch on CodeIV, you probably want to look at DateTime offset because whatever you're doing, you're probably assuming the wrong things anyway. Like if we don't add the API, we have nothing to key it off of. Now we have to flag every single usage of DateTime. That seems like.
But I'm not sure whether it's incorrect because I understand when you call DateTime.UnixEpoch, it will give you a UTC instance. Basically, DateTime kind I don't see, but because it wraps, but it's probably UTC. It's actually what the epoch is.
Yeah.
It's even better representation than DateTime offset, frankly, because the offset doesn't make too much sense for UTC datetimes.
Well, DateTime offset with an offset of 0.
Well, then it doesn't make sense. It's just a wasted space.
Yeah.
Sure.
I mean, the problem with DateTime is if you take a DateTime and you subtract UnixEpoch, if the DateTime that is the left-hand side of that expression is the unspecified DateTime kind,
correct,
your answer makes no sense, but we can't stop that.
But if you if in your program you kind of are careful and all the datetimes that you have are UTC, this is a perfect time.
It's perfect fine. I think we should just add it.
Is it then fair to say that the guidance that DateTime offset is the replacement for DateTime is not actually true then? Because that sounds like what you're saying. Like if you basically represent everything with absolute zeros, effectively using UTC in your values, then DateTime is fine because it's a shorter variable. It's a smaller value.
DateTime is
because otherwise
at most 32 bits smaller.
The thing is, like everyone uses DateTime.now inside their applications, not DateTime.UTC now.
Well, that's true too, but I mean, we have the same problem with formatting.
Now it's local, not unspecified.
It's local, correct?
Yeah. The problem is when you say new DateTime of 2017, 10, 21, and you give a time, and then you just hit the close parenthesis. That's unspecified, which is whatever you don't want it to be once you start doing operations.
But I think if you subtract a UTC time from a local time, I think that I need to check, but I'm pretty sure that leads to
it should be called DateTime optimistic now.
DateTime
now.
DateTime.
We'll try to make it work. We'll try to make it work.
Right. So then I think the conclusion here is API approved. And
so let me ask one more question. So what bothers me a little bit that on the DateTime offset we have the to Unix thingy, which seems to be at least one of the major reasons for that. Would it make sense to add, instead of adding the Unix epoch and exposing that, add the to Unix method? Like, would it satisfy all of the requests, or is there another scenario where the Unix epoch is really interesting? Just asking.
Well, let's say you have
Any
to write a
operation
file
involved
format
with
that
DateTime,
specifies you have to write the seconds past that epoch time. How do you do that?
Like you want the minutes, you want the milliseconds, you want a greater than operation, you want DateTime has things it can do, and it's this is just a number.
Yep, fair enough.
So what I mentioned earlier, where if you're an application developer and you do DateTime.now minus DateTime.UnixEpoch, the number you get back is wrong.
Is it?
It is.
Well, same if you do DateTime now minus any other date that is not local.
Yes, but if we're exposing DateTime.UnixEpoch as a first-class citizen, and we expect people to use it in things like subtraction operations, that's what's going to happen.
Actually, I'm thinking maybe it's actually what you said is gonna just work fine.
I'm looking at the code. It doesn't.
It doesn't?
No.
Because we know that DateTime now is local.
Yeah.
It's not unspecified, and we know that this one is UTC.
Yeah. But
And
the subtraction, the subtraction operator doesn't take
into
into account.
It's
text minus text. It's a text minus text.
Okay.
But that's pre-existing problem of the DateTime, right?
Right.
Yeah. Well, his question is, are we setting people up for failure by adding it to DateTime?
No, I think a better thing to do probably would be to take the two Unix time methods from DateTime offset, copy those onto DateTime, and that way you can ensure that the return DateTime is always in the correct format.
Or we just have it on the tells you that we're doing it wrong. And set this user. We actually call the method. Like I'm somewhat hesitant to try to guide people by omission of API, and the reason it doesn't work is that if you can't find the API, like you're not necessarily likely to read up on how the whole thing works, right? You just do some other crazy hack. You do new datetime offset, do your thing there, and then you say dot local time and get it back. Like in the end, like you can still get some other.
You essentially would want to add it as obsolete. Please call the one on datetime offset.
No, I think UnixEpoch is fine, but it's very easy to detect in static analysis that you do datetime.null minus datetime.UnixEpoch, and then we say, you know what, you should call the method and pass in the arguments. And like, all right, that works for me. I mean, that seems like a better fix than to go out of our way to not give people APIs just because they may misuse them. Because then, like, if there are valid ways you can use the API, then the question is, what value do we add by not giving you the API? That seems backwards.
Plus, people can do the datetime UTC.now, right?
But no one does it in
I know.
practice.
But once you hit that and find, oh, there's a bug, you can fix
I don't
it.
know. I think people see the problem. That's the problem. I've berated enough people on server teams I've worked on that they finally started never writing datetime.net. Yell at people enough, they learn how to not get yelled at.
So you have a new row?
Alright, anything wrong then with my conclusion?
That's my old role. I'm trying to give it up.
You sure about that?
I'm trying. Doesn't say I'm doing a good job.
It's all seen about that was
Should we add the APIs though? Because it seems to like a
The
Unix
to and from
thing is
Unix
on
time?
datetime.
Seems fine to me.
So Unix time, okay. It's just so we should talk to Tarek and ask him, because the semantics of Unix epoch are very clear. It's a UTC time of certain time. These Tarek needs to say like what would the semantics be of to Unix time, given all the different modes that datetime is in.
It would datetime.to universal time minus Unix epoch.
Is that what?
So if you have an unspecified, it will change it because that's what unspecified does, I think. And that will just be like, that will go in the remarks of it treats unspecified as local.
Yeah. So that one, you were pointing out some of the mistakes that people can make. Like I'm less concerned with like exposing the epoch time and then people not understanding what datetime now is or
alternatively,
others.
We could say that it has to throw if it's unspecified.
But
it's a new API. You're not going to break it.
Indeed. Throw of this is an ambiguous result. Please pick which format you're in. Now it's your bug, not mine.
Right, now it's 11, so we should go over the other two issues that we said we will do.
Emo, can we go back to the socket one just briefly?
Sure. I remember the
22608.
There we go.
So I was partially right and partially wrong, or I was wrong about my explanation. The issue is exactly that the compiler does find the conversion from array segment to memory. So it binds more strongly to the new instance method than to the old extension method, which would be fine, except that they have different return types. And so any code that was performing operations on the return of the operation rather than just awaiting it will break.
I see. Makes sense.
Which kind of like reinforces, like I think what we said earlier, is like if we should avoid a situation where we have to do this on an ongoing basis to basically demand that the compiler does all resolution between new and old, and then just have them either consistently on the extension class or consistently on the instance type, so that it's easier for us to reason about overloads when we add them.
Yeah. So I think either we keep them all on the extensions or we add them all as instance and nothing in between.
Yeah. Yep. I mean, you could still handpick the method. It's just that for a given name, we should move the whole method group, not just part of the method group. All right. So then, Christoph just ran out, which is useful.
Let me get in. Right there.
I was already here, so like. Right. So we looked at this before, right? So what has changed since last time we looked at this?
I have a couple of things. First, we don't have them as encapsulated into decoder and encoder classes, nested types. They are just flat APIs. And second is we added, renamed some of the arguments based on some feedback and method names, and added an isFinite block optional argument for most of the APIs.
So I have a question about the isFinite block. I added a comment to your PR.
Yeah.
I don't know if we want to discuss it now or first let people kind of understand the API and then we can get to it.
You don't make the API, we can just look at them.
I do if you go to the bottom. Proposed API.
Oh, what are the commented ones?
That's for open question 1.
So originally, like we had a design where we had nested types that are basically the transformers, right? Is that?
No, so there was basically base 64 outer type and then 2 nested subtypes for UTF-16 and UTF-8. As we discussed last week, this whole thing with nested types really doesn't work super well in our ecosystem that is not ready for we didn't have many nested types in the framework, so our IntelliSense doesn't work refactoring. I now concluded we shouldn't be doing nested types.
Or should we fix the tooling?
Or maybe fix the tooling, but fixing tooling is not a super practical solution. So we unnested them. And that's why in the names now it says bytes to UTF-8, because if we ever need to add bytes to UTF-16, it would be super convenient.
Why is it called bytes to UTF-8 as opposed to encode to UTF-8 or something like that? Because you're doing base 64 encoding.
Yeah, we could call it encode. Sometimes encode and decode, it's not clear which one is which. But
because you have byte in, byte out, or
because in general, I find it not super clear what encode or decode is. Which direction is which. It's like with the, we have some APIs that say in and out, and depending on your perspective, in is a writer or a reader.
So the caller's just expected to know.
Why wouldn't we address this, Christoph, with the source destination naming for the arguments, like encode to UTF-8, and have a read-only span byte source and a span byte destination, and then it's just the name of the method?
Because if you type base 64 dot, you don't yet see the parameters.
Why do you need to see the parameters at that point? It's you only care about which parameters go where when you.
No. It's about base 64 dot. I now see a list of APIs. Which one do I choose to convert my byte array to string?
Are you saying that normally people rely on IntelliSense for that rather than just knowing that it's encoded? Is that your argument?
I don't know if normally, but some people do. In general, it's better to design APIs that work well with IntelliSense, unless there's a reason not to.
Christoph, I guess I'm confused. Is the concern that we're going to add additional methods to this class that will be using something other than bytes?
No. So we are now discussing, should the methods be called, encode, decode? I was just saying, I found it sometimes confusing which direction is encode and decode.
Well, it sounds like you you could actually make a good argument for maybe if you support UTF-16 in the future, then you have read-only span byte in and then span char out, right? So would that be bytes to UTF-16? Is that what that need to be?
Yeah. Whether it's span of char or span of byte. Anyway, I don't feel super strongly about this. I was just saying, like, we used to have it as, decode encode, and decode encode doesn't, like, always. I know that people use these names, but it's not as crisp which direction is.
But the thing is, for base 64, encode and decode are very well-defined operations. That's.
You have to kind of know a bit more. These APIs are like, if I have a byte array, I call bytes to UTF-8.
I don't know. I think logically, in general, when you say encode and decode, you expect it to be. Encode means into whatever that format is, which means if I say encode for base 64, I expect to get a base 64 string back, because that's literally what encode in that context means. But if I say MPEG-4 encoding, I expect to get an MPEG back, right? I don't expect to get some normalized video format back, right? That's, I think, generally how encode decode is meant. If we want to go with a different name, that's also fine, but I think that it's a bit weird that. Weirdest thing is I can't find my mouse. It's a bit weird to have that, calling it encoders and decoder APIs. We now put it in the, system buffers.txt, and it seems like they're missing the verb of the activity at this point, right? It's like, 2 byting is not really a thing, right? Or
if you follow this pattern, what happens if you have a transform in the future that is UTF-8 to UTF-8 or bytes to bytes? At that point, you would need encode and decode in the method names, because this pattern doesn't work in those scenarios, right?
Maybe.
But the names don't have to be exact for those scenarios.
They don't have to match, but isn't there something to be said for at least having a consistent naming pattern across all these different transforms?
Well, so I think for example, we have some APIs that it was even less clear which direction it goes. As I said, I don't have a very strong opinion on this. If people don't like the naming pattern, I don't care too much.
I think whether it's instead of or in addition to, I think we need encode and decode in the name.
So basically, let's do a kind of a prototype. Imo, can you copy and paste this whole type? The members, and just rename them to use the encode decode terminology. So the first one would be called encode to UTF-8, correct? Yeah. No, the int property, the int method as well. But
yeah. This would be bytes to encode. I guess we just type it out and then we can get encoded UTF-8 link.
No. So if we add UTF-16, what would this method be called?
Get decoded from UTF-8. I still don't think, and this might be a separate conversation, that it's appropriate to use span and byte to represent both UTF-8 and UTF-16.
It doesn't change this method name.
That is correct. Yeah.
8 next to B.
Actually, no, it doesn't change this method at all.
What is it?
This method would be the same in both cases. It would still take the exact same int argument and return the exact same value. So it could have the same thing.
If the int is no.
It's the number of elements of the input, not the absolute length and bytes of the input.
Well, but so if for UTF-8 it would be number of coding units.
Yeah, for UTF-16 it would also be number of coding units.
Then it's not the same method.
It gives you the exact same result in both cases.
I don't think so.
It does.
No.
I love that.
Because some coding units in UTF-8 have three. Some code points have 3 coding units.
Yeah, but for base 64 it doesn't matter because base 64 requires ASCII input.
The string length for both UTF-8 and UTF-16 is the same, right?
Yeah.
Like it's a function of the string length, not a function of the bytes.
For other transforms that might matter, but for base 64 it wouldn't.
Yeah, this is kind of interesting as well because so I have UTF-8 string. If it is not ASCII, then decode method will fail because it will do validation, correct? But this one would return kind of a wrong result.
Well,
I don't know.
I mean, you could give it a string of all smiley faces, right? And this would still return.
An output buffer called the decode method,
Yeah.
and it could run out of space before it hits the.
But you only pass the length, you don't pass the data, right? So like this thing is not able to validate.
The contract of these methods together is the following. If I compute the length and then I call decode with an output buffer that is equal or larger than the length that was computed,
Yes.
will never fail with output buffer too small.
Correct.
That is not the case if I pass an invalid UTF-8 buffer.
That is the case. It won't fail with too small. It will fail with invalid data.
It may fail with too small.
How?
It probably won't. I was thinking that basically it could run out of data before it hits an invalid code point, but that's probably not the case. Maybe it's fine.
Ignoring the length for a second, are we happy with the method names for the other two at least? Because I would say that looks pretty good to me.
I'm fine.
Ben Adams threw in a suggestion to rename the class to base 64 encoding, and then have to UTF-8 and from UTF-8 methods.
I have to say I kind of prefer that because it names what the thing does and it gives us some vocabulary versus like this one is not too bad because at least you have encode and decode as the primary operations, so it kind of gives you a vocabulary, but the other one was literally you have a bunch of methods and there's nothing you can say across the whole type that would allow you to like Google for things or giving you a sort of like keyword-based vocabulary. But now we have at least 2 keywords, encode and decode. If we actually make this the base 64 encoder, then I think it's even better. Because
I don't like it. So I have to say I don't like it.
Why?
Because it both encodes and decodes, and then we remove the encode and decode from the method names, and we are back to the original problem that people didn't
Well,
like.
you still have 2 in front, which means that you're going. If you call it encoding instead of encoder, you're going into the encoding and from the encoding.
He suggested encoding, not
Yeah.
encoder.
Base 64 encoding.
Okay. Yeah.
I see. Okay, that one is a bit better than encoder.
What I like about this is also that it kind of like gives a convention across all types, right? Like it basically becomes, whatever you want to encode, right?
Yeah.
Except we do that for our encoders, like UTF-8 encoding, we already have those.
So
So the convention would be whenever you're doing the encoding, it's to, and whenever you're decoding, it's from. Is that what you're thinking?
Kind of has to be this way, right? I don't know how else you would do it.
For encoding and from encoding.
And then you would have to UTF-16 from UTF-16.
Well, Arthur makes a good point though, like we already have encoding types. So now we would have UTF-8 encoding, UTF-16 encoding, like it's, and they're not the same types logically because they don't operate over strings. But I think that is something that we just have to think about in general because it's kind of bad to have two concepts called encoding with very different API shapes. I mean, that's something you just, I mean, I don't know how else you would call this thing. Like, if you don't call it, we still have to call it something. Just because you don't name the API doesn't mean that there's no name for the concept.
Right, so we have two alternatives. I have to say I'm okay with either of them. Now that we, initially I thought that Ben proposed to call it encoder, but encoding is fine. There are pros and cons on both.
Second is better because you don't need to decide which is encoding, which is decoding, because decoding is from more complex to kind of raw format. But how do you know which one is raw? I mean, more raw.
Did you just come to the room?
We discussed that we don't like that decode and encode. They're like kind of confusing.
Yeah.
So.
And the second solves
The
that problem.
from are kind of like more explicit.
It's encoding. It encapsulates the format. It doesn't tell you which way is encoding or decoding.
Although that's the to and from. Yeah.
But it's not encoding or decoding. It's just transform.
Okay. So did you see the original APIs? Yeah, they don't talk about, and I was talking. That's why I asked. Did you just
the very original when I came, it was already encoding, decoding.
No. The original one doesn't even use the word decode and encode. I was saying that I kind of sometimes find it confusing which one is which direction. But we are not designing the APIs for me, so.
What's the trouble with the UTF-8 encoding and existing classes and stuff?
So the existing classes that we have in system text, UTF-8 encoding, UTF-16 encoding, they're
Forever?
Well, they're since should be one, right? So they will
So
be
forever.
Yep. And they are. There's an abstract type called encoding, and then there's derived types, right? And so that's a completely different technology from what this is.
I see.
And they are working on byte arrays and strings. This one works on buffers, right?
There's a good chance we're going to make them work with bands and buffers too.
Well, that doesn't change the fact that the API shape of both of them are very different. I mean, there may be some interop now, but like you still have different technologies. So should we just call it maybe transform?
Also, we have a hierarchy of the encodings. Like there's a base encoding type, and base 64 encoding kind of implies that it inherits from the encoding base type. It's just base 64 transform is like, yeah, we added some suffix for no, like it doesn't add value. This is actually why I called it base 64 without any suffix, because everything else after base 64.
This is the thing I disagree with. So, like for example, like we will eventually have this type of API for UTF-8 and UTF-16. Fair?
You mean for transcoding between encodings, text encodings?
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
So how do you call the whole group?
UTF-8. The type is now called UTF-8.
You know, you have UTF-8, you have UTF-16, you have base 64. What do you call the group of these types?
Oh.
A namespace.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, that's the thing, right? We just try hard to avoid the word encoding. So let's call it something else. I'm just making up.
Well, since it's an operations, so they return operation styles. Maybe they are operations.
Sorry?
Base 64 operations.
Emo, can you bring up the existing base 64 methods? I think they're on the convert class.
The existing, like these ones are, yeah. Where's my browser?
You're right. It's system.convert.to base 64 string, and from base 64 string. There's also char array overlays.
As operations is like it's like the method equivalent of utilities or utils, right? Like if I couldn't come up with a name, that's why I call anything.
Well, the same with transformation, right? That's why I
mean, transformation I think is slightly better because you already have this. Oh, we call it operation status. Okay, great. But like we used to call it transform status, right?
Well, no, it's still a question.
Yes. Actually, so we have two of them. That makes it slightly better. But I think if we call it transform and then we have transformation status, I mean that.
Okay, it used to be called transformation status. It was renamed because it was used in APIs that don't transform, like copy from one buffer to another.
Yeah.
Which is general.
I mean, operation status is like, I don't know, it sounds very generic.
It should be
But it's
status.
not. But it's for me that type, the operation status or transform status is not tied to just the transformers.
True, but like once you have a name called, I don't know, transforms, it kind of makes sense that on those methods you want to use the transformation status. That seems logical. If you also reuse transformation status somewhere else, I think that's not too bad. Right?
Or you can think about transform as like specific operation, or subtype of operations, some kind, subgroup, whatever.
The other problem I have with operation is that everything is an operation, right? Like that makes the technology like super generic. It's like
because this type is for super generic thing.
Is it?
Yes. This type is returned from an interface method that is called
We don't have it yet, as far as I know, right?
Yeah, but we will. So.
Yes. But really, this is you have a source buffer and you have a destination buffer, and you're doing some kind of shuttling between the two.
Yes.
Potentially with conversion.
No, I really think that's at the root of the problem. I think this particular thing we need to name that concept. I really think we do. Like at some point you want to write docs about this and say, how do you do this thing?
Yeah, they are buffer operations.
Okay, buffer operations seems like a good idea, but then it's a bit long if you want to prefix it. Or if you want to, basically for buffer operations seems like a long name, but I mean, that would be fine.
That's pretty long. I'm saying the concept is called buffer operations. We don't have to like.
Wait, that's what I'm saying. In the perfect world, you have a concept that's short that is amenable to be combined with other names like base64. That's I think the thing I'm asking for is like give the concept a name, ideally make it somewhat short, and then we can have documentation on that and make things.
I'm going to argue in a few minutes. I don't think we need to type it all.
Operantless. You want it?
What?
Jesus. How did you jump to that?
Well, I've lived through the PowerShell reviews. Correct?
Operantlet.
I think operantlet is a good.
You need your own syntax?
Do you think I'm making it too complicated? Because I think that actually helps if you name the thing.
What is it? To name what?
I'm saying, like, do you think I'm making it too complicated? Because I think, honestly, if you give the thing a name, many other things fall into place.
If we give the concept a name?
Yeah.
Yeah, except that I don't know what the name would be except for buffer operations.
What else is expected?
Or base64 converter, actually, I like that more than transform, but
Transcoding, URL escaping.
Conversion.
So if I want like bit
conversion
parsing
status,
basically
like
transformation.
it's a converter and gives conversion status.
compression.
Even though I'm not sure if the operations in general are more kind of conversions. And they kind of are, right?
Think about Levi, why do we not use this type?
I'll explain.
Buffering,
Is this the right time?
transformation, like come up with a term.
I already did.
If you-
Buffer operations.
Okay, then this type is called base64 buffer operation.
Geez, that's a very long name of the type.
You gave me the long name, so it's on you. It's
Operantlet. Base64 operantlet.
Why do we need to add the suffix?
Yeah, exactly.
It increases the call site and makes it just ugly for no reason.
So the reason why I think it's important is like you're doing this feature now for like 6 months, so you don't count anymore. But like anybody else outside of this realm, as someone you want to tell them how to use the APIs. So what kind of things do you give them so they're successful? So for example, if you point them to an MSDN article that says here's how to do buffer operations, right? If you give this whole thing a name and you have types that reflect that name, people can find stuff, they can learn the technology, like that makes sense. As soon as you have like, basically an undefined feature set in that sense where all the names are generic, that will blend in with all the existing tech that we have. So where do you draw the boundary between old shit that deals with byte arrays and doesn't do the efficient stuff versus what do you call the efficient stuff?
So I mean, you can give the concept a name, but why does the API shape or type have to have that suffix?
Because you have 250,000 APIs. How do I find out which concept these APIs are using?
Namespace.
that good enough? Like, how would I search for that? Like, the namespace is a very
system buffers.text.
Yeah.
and you say what, buffers in base64, and are you likely to hit this thing then?
If you do system buffers.text,
Well, you don't really need to ever look at the type aside from as a return value from these APIs. And I would imagine many people would just write $x equals.
Well, I mean, the type is static, right? So you never use the type anyway, right?
No, I mean the enum that's returned is what I was referring to.
Oh, I guess the enum, yeah, that's fair.
To me, the class doesn't look like it's an operation. The operations are methods. The class represents the format.
Right.
So it's like base64 format or base64 encoding, or I mean, it's a thing. It's a schema.
I guess that's fair. So that lost like what? Okay. So what is your proposal then in that context?
I'm just saying it's not a transform. It's a collection of things related to base64 format or encoding, or what I mean is it should be the class represents the format, not.
I think those two are.
Format is.
I mean, format would also work in the same way that encoding would work, I suppose.
Yeah. I'm not proposing like specifically format or encoding. I'm just saying the name of the class represents the format-like thing.
The formatting, though, you tend to use to represent I'm taking some kind of data like an integer and presenting it in a human-readable fashion.
Right.
Yeah, I'm not saying specifically format or encoding. I'm just saying that operations live inside, but the container represents the schema.
So, Emo, can we address the open question and come back to this one? Maybe offline or after the fact.
So that's what I'm saying. I would suggest you come up with a name, whatever. That doesn't add anything, then that's also fine.
Well, can we stick it to that for now?
So for now, okay, if we don't come up with a better name, can we agree on one of the alternatives that we had, concrete alternatives?
I like the first one, but
like go back to your like tool. Oh yeah, this is the tool. Like
base64 encoding.
I like the top one.
So base64 as a static class as opposed to base64 encoding.
Well, because encoding, so I'm also okay with base64 encoding. It does have the negative that some people may think that it inherits from the base encoding type.
Would you ever consider putting other static helper methods off of the base64 setting type? Just, I can't think of any offhand, to be honest. But.
Like the UTF-16 transformations.
Yeah, I mean things that aren't really transform related.
Oh, probably not.
Get bytes length is not a transformation.
I don't like the transform suffix, I have to say, because it just doesn't add any more value, in my opinion. It's like operation, transform, any generic word that says nothing.
What does operation status live? Can you specify?
Buffers, I think.
Alright, then.
So I'm going to now argue why I don't think we need operation status at all. So
let's capture this first. This is naming rights. Right?
Yeah, frozen video again, by the way.
So we have that, and then should we go the list over? Like, do you talk about operation status at some point?
No.
So let's hear Levi about the operation status.
So I want to address the in-place APIs first, because I don't think operation status makes sense as a return enum from those APIs. Because if the in-place really only can be done as a one-shot, it doesn't really make sense to do it any other way. And as a result, and the reason that I say that is because you're generally going to be expanding or contracting the buffer, which means that if you're run out of data, basically there are some bytes at the end of the buffer that you haven't encoded. Well, you've now overwritten them with the output. so that data is now permanently lost to the caller. He can't ever call the method in a loop anymore. So needs more data is kind of a meaningless status as far as an in-place encoding goes. Now also consider needs more room. Well, again, if you're doing an operation within a single buffer, like you really do need to check ahead of time that the buffer is large enough to contain the entire result, because again, there's no way for the caller to restart an incomplete procedure. So at that point, you actually just have to fail if the destination isn't big enough to do an in-place conversion. At that point, you've now removed needs more data and output buffer too small, which means the only thing you're left with are success and fail.
So you're talking about just the in-place, correct?
In-place,
it's possible. Can we talk about the is-final block, whether it's needed at all?
It is just from the point of view that say that you're calling this in a loop, and you're reading data from a network buffer, and you get 55 bytes of data from your incoming network stream. Like, that's not evenly divisible by 3. So how do you, are you supposed to add padding to that, or are you supposed to return back to the caller needs more data?
No, so you call the API,
yeah,
and it will basically tell you it has a leftover, or it's missing some bytes, correct?
Yeah,
right,
but
that would be needs
how
more
do you
data.
say, there's no more data after this, I want you to apply padding?
Yep. Let me think, because we talked about some encodings. So for some encodings, I understand that there's ambiguity.
Like base64 URL.
Exactly.
So
I understand why we would need this parameter for these methods. For the, classic base64 encoding, I thought there was no ambiguity.
Let's say you have, the entire buffer is a multiple of 3, okay?
Yes.
But you send it 1 byte at a time. Every time you send 1 byte, it's going to pad with equal signs, because you didn't tell me this is not the final block. How do I know that this is not the final block and I shouldn't pad? And only pad at the very end. Because if you don't give me a multiple of 3, I'm going to pad regardless, assuming it's the final block. So you need to somehow convey that.
It basically breaks it when you're calling in a loop. If you don't tell the transform whether the final block is reached or not.
Right. Or even if it's not in a loop, if it's just partial.
Basically, you need to tell it so it can add padding. That's basically what it is.
Why isn't it called add padding then, instead of is final block?
You could call it that if you want to. The idea is if you have a generic transform API, say that this were an interface, you would probably want to call it as final block just because you don't know what it's going to do with that information. Maybe it'll add padding, maybe it won't. But it needs to know that there's no more data.
You need to understand the format specification to understand what add padding means. Here it's like, this is the last time I'm calling this API. Do whatever you want with this information.
Right. But your point is valid though. If this were just base64 in isolation, add padding true false makes sense. And maybe it makes sense to rename it on the static class. In the concept of an interface, it just needs to be more generic.
Do we have a generic interface we're talking about here at all for these?
But they are not.
Yeah, it's buffer operations with a transformer execute method that has similar signature.
We have this concept of final block in some other APIs.
System text encoding has it, and crypto transform has it. Yeah, system text encoding actually has this built in as a concept.
So what is, so if I say it's final block false, and I hit the case that you just described, what does operation status give me? Needs more data?
Yeah. Yes.
And my only concern that I guess I have is, and I don't know how to solve it, is like this whole idea of if you happen to be at equal boundaries, you can return the byte array to the caller and everything is fine, and you only hit the case when you end up in the, I still need more stuff, but I guess that means the caller does it incorrectly and doesn't mean the return rate is in all cases, which, the caller should never return that array because you basically return a partially completed operation, which I think is fair. But yeah.
So, Asan, now let's go back to, I understand why we need this final block. Why did we return operation status from the in place versions? Because I'm pretty sure that they used to be like not returning. Was it just for consistency?
I believe so, yeah.
I mean, APIs need operation status either.
Yeah, that one we.
Issue 22412, which is what this is about. Whether or not
The operation status was recommended by this committee when we reviewed it first time.
And we got back and forth about
the
it.
committee has a very high bar for reversing its recommendations.
Changed.
That solves a naming problem if you just delete the entire email.
I sort it doesn't, but that's a different thing.
So just as a reminder, so people, basically we had APIs that didn't have this operation status. If you don't have the operation status, you need to do some checks on the ints being returned to know what's the case.
My argument was if you're calling this in a loop, then you need to do those checks anyway.
Well, so basically we showed to this API review committee the loop that people need to write and all the checks, and everybody in the room said, what the heck is this? This is too complicated. Can we just return an enum that tells you exactly like what is the state of your operation?
What he's saying is that in place APIs you cannot call in the loop anyway.
No, now we are discussing
APIs. If you call in a loop, you're going to have to do the exact same actions regardless of what the enum value is. So I have the enum. Your actions will always be increment the read buffer, increment the write buffer, expand the write buffer if you have to, go to the top of the loop. In all cases.
Yeah, we would need to see the code sample that actually does it.
I have a code sample, by the way.
The code samples for both.
Yeah, I do have a code sample.
Send it to me, I will project it. Because yeah, I agree with Chris. The last time I looked at the generic loop, it was
like doing the check seems like if you didn't write a comment above the check, it's not easy to tell by the check what it is.
I thought this enum was born more out of the fact that we were calling these methods try, and we couldn't actually convey which.
No, it was exactly because it's an enum because now it returns information about things that otherwise you would have to compute from the returned ints. Like
it previously had bool, right? Was it called try?
Yeah, it was try. So this is one condition, and then you had to like look at the ints and see whether this input buffer length is the same as the number of consumed bytes. Then it means that it consumed everything. You also need to look at the output buffer and the integer returned to know whether you ran out of space. And sometimes, maybe you didn't run out of space. It was exactly the output buffer was the right size. And
so this is assuming an interface, which let's just and copying, basically reading data from one stream, doing the transform, and then writing it to another stream.
Okay. So where are your checks for the return?
Go to line 56. Like that's it. If there was an error during the transform, just fail. Otherwise, bump the pointers on the slices, and then jump back to the top of the loop. And the loop terminates when there's no more data to be read.
Yeah, that's not what the code looked like. We also had to handle.
You can see the other code in the CoreFx library for comparison, if you like.
I mean, I'm using streams, but you can imagine this.
No, we don't have the other code.
The pipe API?
Well, but it uses the enum.
Yeah,
we don't have the code that was using the ints anymore.
Yeah. I'm saying to compare to what Zip has in
source. I only know the path. Source. System buffers experimental. System. Buffers. Buffer extensions. method is called pipe. The first one.
Alright, so here is. I see a go-to in this code.
Go-to is a great underused.
So then, I mean, this code is checking the enum value, but I don't think it's required because what you could have done is before the call to transformation.execute, like query how much output and query the size of the output buffer that you'll need because we have APIs to get the size, and then just make sure that your output has that available, and then call transform.execute. And if it's not finished, just go to the top of the loop.
What if there's not enough available in the output buffer?
You just
Then you
fail.
go to the top of the loop because you're not finished.
No, but we still call, in your code sample,
Yeah.
you still call the method, even if the output buffer is too small, correct?
Right, and what it returns is not error, but it returns not finished, and then it just jumps up to the top of the loop.
Oh, so, but you still compute, where do you compute the output size?
I don't compute the output buffer size because I'm writing to a string.
Oh,
But if
okay.
you had an I output, then the logic would look slightly different.
But then, so if you compute, sometimes you will be basically running through the buffer twice. First
Not
to
necessarily, because what a lot of the methods that we're exposing are like, give me the worst case output size, and you could make sure that you have an output buffer of that size, maybe capped at like 8K or something, I don't know.
Oh,
And
but
you
then
just write that.
there may be a bug where the output length told you that you don't have enough space, but in fact you had enough space.
Yeah.
Well,
Which is fine, because what you do is you try making sure that you have the worst possible case for the output buffer. Maybe, like, you request 43K, maybe it says, no, I'm just going to give you like 20K. And then you call transform, and some number of elements are converted, maybe all of them, maybe not. If not all of them, jump to the top of the loop and start again.
oh well, so you don't rely on the expected length.
Correct. It's
Completely
just
you
an
do.
optimization, but it's not mandatory.
So anyway, I would need to. So
Can we again pin this discussion?
Yeah.
Because it could either whether it's a bool or a enum, that's could be separate. But can we focus on the other questions at hand?
Well, I mean, we can, but it seems like if we keep hunting decisions, I'm not sure the EPI is super useful because then we just end up with like, we do the same loop you just described. We go back to the top of the list, and then 2 weeks from now we have the same discussion again. Like we need to close at least on a few things, or at least give you homework that here's the criteria. So you just keep hunting decisions. So the two things that I think we had said is one of them is. Hold on. I lost even again. There we go. So the other thing is that we said there is the general shape of the APIs, like encode versus decode. It seems like we settled on that. Then there was the discussion on like, do we need the enum at all for the in-place things? Should we treat in-place differently? And then there's the third one, which is like even if it's not in place, like what does the API shape look like? And it seems like there is this opinion in the room maybe that we don't need the enum at all. We can just simplify the pattern to the point people know what to do, which seems fine. But then I think what I would like to see is the extracted code for the general pattern, not just a specific example where you know that the output size doesn't change and stuff like that. But it's actually this is like the copy and paste snippet you expect everybody to write, and how would that look like? I guess would be the question.
Well, the only people who would be using these APIs in a loop would be people doing like piping operations.
Yes.
I think the majority of callers would just expect this to be a one-shot API. Like I have some input buffer as a single operation. Write everything to the output buffer. If you can't do it, fail.
Well, that's fair, but that doesn't take away that the people that have to write the loop that they have to do it, right?
We need to basically look at your code sample. So I have to say, like, I was looking at the code, and like, I think maybe offline, Ason, you poke holes in the code.
Yeah, I talked to him yesterday.
And if you're convinced that it works, well, then we don't need the operation status, correct? And it's fine that we would reverse that decision from this committee. I think we are all in agreement that the in-place operations, the operation status is not needed, correct?
Yes.
That one I think we are.
To me, like, method returns a lot of data, including operation status. But can you compute operation status from other things the method returns?
You can.
If you can, then why are you returning
Because
it in two forms?
the computation was like.
But then
prone to bugs.
But then you are introducing possibility that one doesn't match another. Which one I trust?
Well, but that's the implementer of the API made a mistake.
Yeah.
Which is like, it's much more probable that the callers would make a mistake than the implementer of the
I'd say if you did want the concept of operation status, you can't always get it in full fidelity just from the output parameters. So the caller could see if the conversion was incomplete by looking at bytes consumed and bytes written, but he doesn't know if the conversion was incomplete because he ran out of input data or out of buffer.
Yeah, that's what I think. Like, the only thing you cannot compute is whether there is no more data.
Right, but I was arguing I don't think that's important because if you're calling this in a loop, you're handling both cases anyway as part of the natural code you've written.
Well, what you're saying, the method must return something, but it must be a bool or something.
I would respond with bool, but yeah.
And bool would mean
bool is
no more data.
Bool is I didn't encounter an error. So true is some data was converted, maybe not all, maybe 0. And false is there's bad data, don't even bother calling me again because I'm stuff is going to fail.
So false means don't call me again.
Yeah, but false is true, basically.
No more data is also...
No more data is true. Output too small is true. You gave me empty buffers and I couldn't do anything is true. And I finished everything is true.
So basically only failure is false.
Yeah.
So you may need to terminate even on true, because...
Well, even the loop, the outer loop has to end. Even
your loop will end when you run out of input data, basically. Because you're reading input data from some read-only bytes from an input stream from something. When you're out of data, then you terminate your loop because you have nothing left to do, and then you fall into another loop, which is, I might have a buffer of remaining bytes, let me pump that through the transform. So the transform at that point can never return true without consuming all the data.
So you know that you're out of data by some other external means.
Yes, because your source is empty at that point. But you, the caller, know that.
Yeah, because the caller is expected to essentially have a loop that shuffles data into a buffer and then passes it to this, right? So when you are out of data to put into buffers, then you're clearly done, right?
And you can also optimize this by saying, okay, instead of keeping my own stack ally buffer, I'm just going to take the raw span I get from the input and pass it through the transform. Like, you can do various optimizations like that. A little harder to do.
Another option that we may have is, like, maybe we're overthinking it. Maybe we can just say, instead of having, 2 return arguments, like bytes written, bytes read, we can formalize this into a single struct that has 2 values, and you just can query properties on this guy that says, am I done yet? Because really the only thing you have to do is compare these relative to each other, usually, compared with your input size to know what to do. And
but the ints are not used just to know whether you've done. They are used for then advancing spans and some other things.
And yeah, I think you brought up a good point earlier, which is it's really weird for a caller to look at an out parameter to see if the operation is finished. Like, if the caller cares about the difference between finished and incomplete, then maybe an enum would be appropriate in that case.
Well, that's the thing, right? I think if we actually look at code and look at what the comparisons look like, because last time we saw it was like, this is less than or equal to this one, and this is bigger, or that one is like, it seems like these are things that you can easily get wrong. Right? It's like, oh, it should be less than, but it's like less than or equal to or something. And then I think that was the conclusion as well, is that given that buffer operations, you kind of want to make it not very error prone to off buffer.
So I propose that basically Ason goes offline and kind of analyzes both of the code samples and sends something saying, either there's a bug in Levi's code, or maybe it doesn't give you enough information for some scenarios that he didn't, consider.
And we should also modify the type sample does, take read-only bytes, write to an I output, and so on, to make sure that scenario is also good.
Right.
All right. So what is the other? Should we now start going through the other?
Yeah.
questions?
So one of the questions was that our encode length only takes an int, which gives you somewhat of an upper bound by a few bytes potentially. If we have a specific implementation that looks at the input span as well, we could get the exact precise length.
Why? With base 64 and padding.
So if you
always
take a look at the example where you have, that's encoding, right? That has the, if you give the input, which is let's say 7 bytes.
When you compute from base 64 encoding.
No. This is bytes to UTF-8. This is encoding. The example code shows encoding.
Okay, so
it's 7 characters, 7 bytes, right? I put ABC to square. Should it will return 8 if your final block is false. Otherwise, it will return 12. And our current implementation returns 12, because it doesn't have that rule as final block.
Why would it do 8? What happens with the G?
Since it's not a final block, you expect more to come. So you're not including the padding in the size.
That would have been excluded from the bytes consumed count had you called transform. So it pretends that you just never passed it in.
Well, okay, so there's something that we need to talk about. Like, I imagine that the method to compute the length, you would not call it with the next block that you're decoding. You would call it with, like, when you have all the data and you call it with all the block. Like, honestly, when you call it in the loop, like, feeding the next block, I would never call this method.
Well, actually, this would serve as a good optimization for making sure that your I output is large enough to contain the expected output for the input that you have.
But why would I do this? I would just encode or decode as much as it can and keep going. So
you could do that. This would just be an optimization.
What would it optimize?
You could allocate it. Say that your output buffer is currently 1K, but this method's telling you, like, I'm really going to give you 8K if you give me this much input data. You could, ahead of time, make sure that you have an 8K output buffer. That way, transform is just a little bit more efficient. You can get away with calling it fewer times. The loop iterates fewer times.
It's just it walks 8K of bytes twice in memory.
This won't walk it twice.
It will, because...
No, it takes an int as a parameter.
Or if we take...
Wait, are you taking the input or an int? Sorry.
No, input.
Why would you give him the whole input? You only need the size, right? Like your answer does not depend on the actual input.
If we, for those that can compute the length without having the data, it's true. Okay.
I would say, like, if you have to literally parse the input to give the answer, like, the API is pointless. At that point, you just might as well just have a 4K buffer and go as fast as you can. The only thing is, like, if you only take in the int, I'm not sure whether the is final block is super useful, because as Levi said, it makes more sense to me the API gives you the worst case answer, so you assume padding.
Yeah.
Like, worst case, your buffer is 3 bytes to
and at that point, it becomes get max count rather than get actual count.
Yeah. Okay, so question like 3 is related to this. If you only have the one with doesn't have is final block, do we change the name to indicate that it's actually an upper bound, not the actual?
Right.
Like get max length or...
So we talked about this at the previous review.
Yeah.
I suggested it. I think it makes sense.
like get max count or something?
Yeah, because I was afraid that, like, if we in some of these APIs we kind of get lucky and we can get exact, give people exact numbers. In some other APIs we won't be able to give them exact numbers, and then there will be confusion. So this is the upper bound.
That's exactly how system types are coding.
Right. Like even compression, you can usually come up with an upper bound, right? But it's very expensive to come up with the actual number. It's like, well, I have to run the algorithm at that point.
Yeah, and that would be the counterexample to not having it.
Well, but then for compression, we would just not have a method like this. And too bad, you cannot optimize it, like you said.
Yeah. But compression is stateful anyway, so I imagine the call cycle.
Yeah, compression has bigger problems than that. It's stateful, and it also has to have like very large buffers, windows that doesn't work super well for discontiguous blocks.
So what name do you propose for that then?
I think that's. Can you scroll down to 3?
What? For
For
the length?
yeah.
So go back, Imo, to your proposal of the current APIs, because we renamed many. We should do it in the, in here.
Get max decoded byte
Maybe
length.
prefix it with max.
I mean, it's a bit odd on this one because it's literally like we know exactly what it is, but that's specific to base64. I think that's the question.
No, we don't. We don't know. Right? Whether it's padded or not affects
Well, I mean, if you assume this is the entire input, you know for a fact. If you talk about individual buffers, then yes, that's true. That's true. What would you call this? Just length or X length maybe?
Encoded
Encoded length?
length.
It's going to be, if you have a UTF-8 string, it'll be UTF-8 string dot length. If you have a system string, it'll be system string dot length.
Then decode length on the other one?
Yeah, this one is weird because it's like original length. But fine, decoded is like nobody decoded it because it was never encoded.
Yeah, I don't know. The other thing is you could call this input and output, right? Or original and like I don't know, like I would just have some.
Well, it's almost like because this is just a count of bytes. Maybe we should just call it byte length.
Yeah,
I don't know.
that was what it was, but like I don't know, like I just like symmetry maybe as well. I think. Anyway, so
Yeah, byte length isn't bad because you're going to have a span of byte, and you have span of byte dot length. Byte length.
We could just do length. I mean, because the length of byte is 8.
So I pass size of byte times 8 in here.
Alright. Alright, so then this is my conclusion for this one. Let me
You want to change the in place to both?
Sorry?
The return type of in place methods to both?
Yeah, this is my the whole action item. Like that's what I said.
If it's a bool, does that mean it becomes try?
Yeah, sure.
I'm sorry if I missed it, but did we revisit the decision of whether this type would ever get made on it?
We've kind of lost you. Can you repeat?
Sorry, I was wondering if I may have missed it, but did we revisit the decision of whether this class would ever potentially have anything besides UTF-8 on it? Because if it would, that max decoded bytes thing could be ambiguous, right?
Levi was arguing that it's not, but yes, I'm with you that we would need to verify that.
Yes, because I was saying if you're decoding, if you're encoding into a UTF-16 string, you're probably not using span of byte, you're probably using span of char. And the number of elements in the span will be the same.
Yeah, except if you're reading it off the network, something you're decoding, you're reading it off the network or whatever, you're going to be reading bytes.
Yes, but it's going to be represented as UTF-8, not UTF-16.
Says who?
Says anybody who's ever tried writing UTF-16 on the network. Because is it little endian or big endian?
You're assuming that applications won't be doing something, and I'm saying, how can we assume that?
It doesn't have to be network. It can be reading from somebody can be reading from file stream.
So
and it's a UTF-16 file on disk. I mean, it can happen.
Sure, it could happen, but it put it to a span of char at that point. I'd never see this in practice.
What if we have 5 bytes?
What if we what?
What do you have?
Levi, even if what you're saying is true, the get max decoded bytes length, you would still presumably be passing in the number of chars that you're decoding.
Yes, and
so it's still its length
in both cases.
Yeah.
Right, so it's still ambiguous.
It's not ambiguous. It's if you have input as UTF-8, you pass in the count of UTF-8 code units. If you have input as UTF-16, you pass in the count of UTF-16 bits.
And in both cases, it's an int parameter.
Yeah, but the numbers are identical in both cases.
Just needs to.
We lose the room right now. There's people wanting to get in.
We can, just email me or IM me and we can discuss this out.
Also, like, if we can come up with a nice name that includes UTF-8, it would just be safer. I think we had problems that, it doesn't roll off the tongue quite if you add UTF-8 to this name, but maybe if we can come up with something, it's just we make it, explicit and then it's future-proof.
All right. Sounds good. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
This is UTF-16 when you put UTF-16 big into